Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Crit Hit Reviews. I'm Arlyeon, and on today's show, we'll be talking about Thing Trunk's Book of Demons, a humor-filled homage to Diablo, albeit with some twists to the gameplay which change it from a point-and-click ARPG to one which incorporates elements of a deck builder. Now, when it comes to the overarching story of the game, you'll only need to stay a while and listen. So, Book of Demons is a condensed and linear version of Diablo's plot. You're introduced to the town of definitely not named Tristram to chatter with a satirical mirror of the cast, minus Wirt and the blacksmith, for reasons, at least in the blacksmith's case. Just like its source material, a lot of the story is introduced to you vis-a-vis the NPCs providing some brief bits of gossip. Though the more fixed nature of the game's quest objectives means there's ultimately less lore to discover. Other than that, your main source of dialogue is going to be your chosen characters' banter as they enter the respective floors, some boss books that dramatically introduce the game's three main story bosses, and then the silly as heck boss banter. Also, for those not familiar with Diablo, the whole summary of the plot is, there's a demonic incursion centered in this town. In the basement of this abbey. Go and clear it out. And stuff. That's it. It's simple. It's good. And, you know, Book of Demons just takes that and makes it a lot sillier. That said, once you actually dive into the dungeon, it doesn't really take long to see the major differences between it and the title which inspired it. For one thing, whilst they're both point-and-click RPGs, the way you navigate the dungeon is different, as you're locked into moving along tracks in the dungeon, which make it extremely important to avoid getting overwhelmed by the dungeon's denizens. To mitigate this, you're able to see the health of the enemies you're fighting, to enable prioritizing which enemies to tackle to avoid getting swarmed. Especially since the colorations of their heart also tips you to the quirks of the enemy, with green being poison-based enemies, stone just being resilient shitheads, flaming being resistant to all but ice damage, icy being the inverse, and gold just being complete pains in the ass. You're also able to see when the enemies are using special attacks, with the particular ability popping up above the enemy's health. It's not strictly to inform you, however, as you can cancel the enemy's ability by clicking and holding on the abilities icon. That in itself is far from all you're given to brave the creatures in the church's chasms? Chasms. We'll say chasms. Instead, each character class is provided a lot of equipable cards, initially limited by a hand size of 3 slots, though it can be expanded over the course of your adventure with gold. You acquire cards vis-a-vis enemies and chests, which provide you a selection of equipment, consumable items, and spells, some of which are unique to the respective characters while others are shared. That said, while things like the town portal spells can be acquired by all the characters, you do need to find each instance separately across your characters as you don't share those cards across your account, which makes me really sad inside since I literally found 3 different legendary versions of the town portal fucking spell. Cry. And yes, there's a neat selection of gear tiers for you to both uncover and upgrade if that whole mention of a legendary town portal spell didn't clue you in. That said, it is the cards that are your main form of gaining strength, as leveling in and of itself provides a far more subtle choice of acquiring either a single point of health or a single point of MP. And given MP is needed to both cast spells and equip the gear which provides passive abilities, it is an important choice in the long term. Especially given that the game's elite enemies and bosses end up being functionally more akin to puzzles than simply meat walls. See, each one of these ends up being a multi-phased monster, but each phase may require something different to do, whether it be simply emptying health, staying within close proximity to the enemy and dodging its attacks, or just not dying for a certain period of time, or murdering the minions it spawns while it pesters the hell out of you. And it's only when all of those phases are exhausted that it finally gives up the ghost and explodes like a loot piñata. Still, once you've conquered the game's 3 areas and defeated the Archdemon, you're far from done, as that's the point where you unlock the game's endless mode, albeit only on the character you've reached the end with. This mode more or less lets you cycle through the game to level up, get more loot, and gradually try your hand against the game's increasing difficulty modes. Modes which enforce their challenge not just by ramping up the enemy's health, but also by imposing arbitrary cards within your hand. causing the bosses that you encounter to curse you and limit which cards actually work, and on the higher difficulties, providing the risk of losing cards whenever you die. There's also optional rematches with the game's bosses at increasing higher tiers of strength, which provides some fairly excellent opportunities not only for golden experience, but for a higher than average odds to acquire legendary gear. And I mean, if you enjoy suffering, there's also a roguelike mode, which limits your healing like crazy, mixes up items a bit more thoroughly so they don't necessarily favor you as nicely, and ensures that you need to pay gold to resurrect or risk simply not coming back. And it also more or less halves what you get from leveling up. Now, when it comes to the game's sound design, there really is a lot to like, whether it's the voice acting for the various characters, or the themes, including the Easter egg one. Plus, I was quite a fan of the various classic Diablo lines popping up, albeit with this game's particular spin on them. I got to be like, ooh, I remember this. And also, there's a whole, like, song in there, and the lyrics to it are pretty choice, and it was a great capstone for that moment, and that's all I'm gonna say on it, because spoilers. But yeah, honestly, when I originally heard of Book of Demons, I didn't quite expect it to embrace the book part of its title as faithfully as it did. And what I mean by this is, whilst the game does manage to evoke the visuals of the game it's paying homage to, it does so with a sort of curious pop-up book animation style that you can see here. Overall, it's pretty nice to look at, and it just fits fairly well with the comical theming of the game. Also, it's just a very useful UI. I never really had an issue with navigating anything. So it did take me until the finale to realize that I could use BOD as an acronym for this game, but hell if I'm gonna let that go to waste, especially since I've yet to share my thoughts on this particular game. But first, let's break this all down. Ultimately, when it comes to this particular title, I'm fond of what it did with the original Diablo's formula and its nods to the game and its lore. The shift to its system does make the experience a bit more tactical, though I'll admit that I didn't find myself too drawn towards dabbling with the other player classes once I'd invest an ample amount of time into playing as the warrior well into the higher difficulty of its free play mode. In essence, it might not have the hottest BOD, but it's certainly a solid hit, especially if you're looking for something to at once be nostalgic and innovative. Anyways, this has been Arlyeon. If you enjoyed this episode and my terrible commentary, feel free to leave a remark down in the comments section. Or, you know, just hit the like or, I guess, dislike button if you hated this and want me to know. If you do want to see more indie game reviews or interviews with indie developers, feel free to hit the subscribe button and the little bell icon to get the alert whenever we actually release something new. Anyways, that aside, I hope you folks enjoyed this, and I will catch you all next time. See ya!